Let me tell you about Max Payne. Following their combat racing debut as a developer, Death Rally, Finnish dev team Remedy Entertainment, and more specifically writer Sam Lake, decided to get a little more inspired while pulling together a follow-up. Through a lens that blended the hyper-violence seen in games like Loaded with the grittiness and gloominess of New York detective cop noirs, it gave the team a wealth of ideas. Starting work in the late 90s once again with publisher 3D Realms, the team evolved its gameplay approach to better fit that aesthetic using a new engine they'd called Max FX, which helped give the identity this game was carving out a better shape. While slated to release in 1999 initially, it was delayed and eventually overhauled majorly. The team spent time in New York for character research and its multiplayer feature was canned. These elements, along with further inspiration from other large-scale action movies that dropped at the turn of the millennium, all added to the making of and helped bring the game to its eventual release in the summer of 2001, before being brought to consoles a few months later. The release in question is the creative pivot point for Remedy and would help start a journey that led to more fruitful creative endeavors later on down the line. It's the gem Max Payne. Let's jump back a couple months to when the Game Awards were going on and I was catching highlights from it when I see Sam Lake dancing on a stage for Alan Wake 2. My immediate first thought was, the hell does Max Payne have to do with Alan Wake? Unbeknownst to me, because Max Payne 1 and 2 were my only exposure to Remedy's games when I was younger, that they were the studio that they were, and it caused me to go on a bit of a deep dive along with replay this gem that I adore so very much. Also, similarly to other videos I've done for this segment, I wanted to use this video as a sort of tribute to James McCaffrey, the voice of Max Payne, who also passed away shortly after the Game Awards happened, and I was sort of already doing a mini dive on Remedy as a company because of Sam Lake, whose writing, I think, also adds to that depth in the sort of character driven. You can tell he was very much inspired by a handful of things, like noirs and the sort of gritty action that I would argue was kind of ahead of its time in the sort of era that this came out in, but acted as a nice sort of accent to other things that were also happening at the turn of the millennium when it came to like types of action that were on the rise. I don't know, Max Payne as a game feels like an interesting entity in gaming in hindsight, which was also something I wanted to sort of talk about, because while I think that it has a lot of components that sort of feel in line, or at least felt ahead of the curve and were sort of trendsetters of their own regard, one of the things that I was curious about when deciding to replay this was sort of reevaluating it, given one of the things I also discovered on my dive was that it was getting a remake, which, after playing it, while I do really like what this game has going on and think that it is an interesting take on like an action game with a bit of a deeper narrative focus, it definitely has moments where its age shows tremendously so. The platforming sequences in particular also have just aged terribly. When you're jumping across the rooftops, I fell so many goddamn times. The second nightmare sequence, oh my god, I hated those mazes so fucking much. I love the nightmare sequences, and I think that it has this good sort of thematic element to the progression of the story. You're going deeper into Max's mind as he goes crazier, chasing what seemed like a ghost for the last handful of years, and now finally having a lead. Him revisiting what is his darkest day, and just how disturbing it gets, I think is a good thematic through line in this that adds to the charm tenfold. But god damn it, those mazes really fucking sucked. I do still think if you can find this game, or if you have a PlayStation, I know that it's on the PlayStation Store because that's how I ended up replaying it. The first one is available on there, and this is the one that I have. In the remake, they're combining both stories, but that's also why I'm evaluating just the first game. The one thing that does hold up with this game is the action, though. A lot of the shootout scenes and set pieces are well put together, and the shooting mechanics, while relatively loose because the aiming isn't all that finite, it still does its job and adds to the sort of charm that this game exudes, along with letting the bullet time mechanics be a little more flashy. The big sort of gimmick with the action in this game is that you can slow time down, a la like Neo from the Matrix, and are able to dodge enemy bullets while also sort of having the reflexes to shoot your enemies faster than they can shoot you. It lends to a good use of set piece too, especially when you're getting into the later parts of the game, like the parking garage crawl, where you're sort of climbing down this parking garage and having shootout after shootout on each floor. The sound design also elevates the action to that next level because all the gun sounds in this game are so very loud.
Max Payne? It's Payne! Ah! There he is! Ah! No.
And sort of lends it to the camp that like would lead it to Rockstar, who published the PS2 version. That's another reason why like I had no idea about like the afterthoughts of this game, because it's not really a Rockstar property, it's something all its own. It also still gives you a little bit of edge in the surprises that happen, like the ambush that opens this second chapter, all the while using a storytelling narrative to also give this game its own unique personality and lend to the more character-driven sort of narrative that this game is focusing on, because you are playing Max, a DEA agent caught up in an overall conspiracy on top of that ties into your wife's and child's murder that you have been haunted by for years at this point. The graphic novel style presentation lets this game age a little bit better as well, because graphically it's another moment where I'm curious to see where they improve upon what this game has going on, because this game kind of feels like it's caught between eras. You know, it's one of those games where it was delayed and it kind of shows, because it's one of the last remnants of that like late 90s style of graphics. Games like GoldenEye and Half-Life, which had like actor models on polygonal faces. I think Max Payne does have that next step up, but it feels like the sort of precipice this era could have reached as far as like graphical quality is considered before just outright changing the system as a whole. I adore the sort of look of this game, though. I do think that it's charming with its graphical presentation. Gives this game its own identity amidst that era of gaming that I really enjoy. I think it adds to the sort of grim, depressing atmosphere that permeates throughout this. You know, the voice acting as a whole I think is done very well, and it's got me curious about Remedy's other games, because replaying this made me remember like how much I liked that component of it.
And surrender immediately.
Sure thing, Jim. Me and the boys have been talking, and everyone's real sorry. They'll never do it again.
Who the hell is this?
Being placed at the scene of a bank robbery wouldn't have tipped the odds in my favor.
And I'm curious to see what Alan Wake has in store, because that's a game that I have had for years and just haven't ever played. One of the other things that's not necessarily upsetting or necessarily a letdown with this game, because it kind of is paced so very well throughout all of its twists and turns that happen throughout its 3-act structure, but like the game is still so very short, to the point that they are combining both stories in the remake, something that I kind of wanted to tie into and play Max Payne 2, but then I didn't realize that I didn't have my copy of that anymore, nor is it available on digital stores like the first one is. But I still had a lot of fun with Max Payne 1, and I think that it had a lot that still held up, or at least had a nice endearing charm that I would say makes this a sort of classic in the vein of a lot of stuff that I've talked about in this particular show. I'm glad to see that Remedy as a company is sort of still being championed and is still crafting some games that are still kept up in the conversation, and I'm hoping that from here I can find the time to rekindle some interest in this game, in this dev team's output. But this still holds up as a whole. You know what doesn't hold up as a whole that I decided to indulge in for this video? I don't really know where to begin with this movie. I didn't have the highest of expectations going into it, because I already thought the casting choices were wild in this, and the likes of Max with Mark Wahlberg. I'm sorry. Mark Wahlberg does have an interesting face, but his face is not even comparable to Sam Lake's, and it creates this weird, uncanny valley where I feel like I'm watching somebody try to be Max Payne, but doesn't quite understand the character. Like, the monologuing he does is just fucking terrible, and I don't think evokes the same dramatics that James McCaffrey does. Mila Kunis as Mona is also just a weird choice. I can see what she's trying to do with the character in this, but I just don't think she does it all that well. The twists that they throw in there in the vein of like Max's ties in the department and the company that his wife worked for and how the conspiracy sort of comes to a head feels also clumsy because the game doesn't reach the same resolve that the movie does by its end. The action, I also think, is really neutered in this. I watched the unrated version for this video because I was baffled that they made a PG-13 movie out of a game this violent. I think that the shootouts that do happen are okay, but I own a smattering of other action movies that do the slow-mo action thing far better than what this Max Payne movie has going on. Plus, the scenes where he's looking back on the murder of his wife, I just don't think are nearly as, like, cerebral as the shit in the game. Like, the Valkyrie stuff is kind of cool, but I don't think it goes, like, the full 9, especially given, like, the little bits of hyper action we get, I think, are more interesting, but there's just not nearly enough of it. I also think the wardrobing is just terrible. It leans into the 2000s grit more than the sort of endearing late 90s shtick that Max Payne had going on from a character design perspective. Hell, the bullet time stuff and some of the homages that were homages to begin with feel all the lazier in this movie too. One big point of praise I'll give to this movie is the switching of Woden to Ludacris's character. He fits more within the world that they're building, but I feel like he could also work in the original game. And I'm not going to complain about seeing Ludacris get more work. I like the guy. I hated watching this. If you're wanting a good action movie or you're wanting a good video game property movie, there's a smattering of other things that have been coming out in recent years that are much better than this Max Payne movie. This Max Payne movie was also released amidst like the era where video game movies just weren't good. But the fact that this feels like a product like 5 years too late just adds insult to injury. It is kind of interesting observing this in the framework of when it was released, though, because it meant that Mark Wahlberg was attached to 2 really terrible movies that year. And that was my video on Max Payne. Did you like it? Did you not? Let me know your thoughts on Max Payne in the comments down below. I do want to replay Max Payne 2. I'll probably end up doing that at some point this year, but I probably won't make a video on it. I'll also hopefully play Alan Wake. I don't know. This year's going to be crazy. But at least I got to play a little Max Payne and indulge in a game I hadn't played in a long time. Thank you for joining me in this. If you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on. I'm going to go, though. Thank you so very much for watching. I've got a discography review dropping tomorrow, so hopefully you're excited for that. I've been Viral Rack. You guys are good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day.